So today what we're going to do is talk about treated lumber in the post-collapse environment. So if you're a homesteader, a prepper, or a survivalist, you're going to be using a lot of treated lumber in order to produce food, structures, bridges, roads, fortifications, and fencing. And you need to understand that the idea of treated lumber is not what people think it is. The treated lumber that's available at your local home store, Home Depot and Lowe's, is not rated for ground contact. In the past, when I was a general contractor, I had to special order treated lumber that was designed to be in ground contact. This material is not available to most people. So what you'll be working with is treated lumber that was not designed for ground contact, and that's going to limit its useful life. This particular planter box is approximately 18 years old. And what we're going to do is take a look at it and see what you can expect for the lifespan of this material. So here we're looking at a side that has disintegrated. And in this case, the metal spike fasteners that were galvanized steel are intact. But a combination of rot and termites has destroyed the side and backing. The interesting thing is the dirt that was compacted inside the structure has maintained its shape years after the treated lumber's failed. So what you can expect in a survival environment is your treated lumber is going to last somewhere between 5 and 15 years depending on your local climate, the presence of termites, and exactly how the material was treated. Now when treated lumber is in a vertical situation where it's not in ground contact, you'll find that a lot of times this treated material will outlast the wire and fasteners on it. So that's something to keep in mind. You can see in this application where the material is not in ground contact, but rainfall throws dirt up on it. You can see that the decay rate of the treated material is much faster than it would be if it was further vertical. So limiting the splash of material up onto the treated lumber during rain can be instrumental in preserving the life of this material. So in a survival situation, once it's underway and you have used up all of the treated lumber in your area, you're going to be reduced to using untreated lumber that you can harvest and process yourself. So one of the key things that increases the life of both treated and untreated lumber is having a roof with a large overhang. And you can see here, this overhang is too limited to be of service. So you're going to want a good 3 foot of overhang as a minimum to preserve siding that's not treated. Now in our area, we have a lot of Carpenter bees, and they're extremely rough on the modern treated lumber. Now in the past, when you had the old cyanide compounds and copper cyanide compounds, I never noticed this much damage from carpenter. The newer treatment chemicals seem really susceptible to carpenter ants, and you can see in a year and a half how much damage they've done to this fence post. So what I noticed is with carpenter bee damage, you can lose treated posts in 2 to 3 years. So you're going to have to go around and inspect your posts and take care of the carpenter bees that are tearing them up. Otherwise, you're going to be replacing a lot of posts every 3 to 5 years. So here's a close-up of some of the damage done by the carpenter bees. Now one thing I want to talk about when you're using treated 6x6s, 6x8s, or 8x8s, what you're going to find is these were pressurized and the preservative was injected into them through pressure. And when this occurs, the core of these will not be treated. So in a 6x6, the internal 2 inches of the post may not have any preservative on it. So when you cut these posts, you're going to have to treat the ends of them with a preservative. Otherwise, the rot will start in that area. With today's treated material and lumber, there's a lot of low-grade posts that are constructed for fencing, 4x4s and 6x6s. And the cracking in these and the knots can cause the boards and the timbers to split. And when they split like this, water can infiltrate into the untreated core of these timbers. So when you see damage like this, you're going to have to take and clean and caulk it before it gets to this point, because these will continue to swell and crack and break until they fail. One mistake a lot of people make with constructing buildings or setting temporary buildings or sheds is they don't get the building high enough above the ground. So the bottom timbers on this shed are treated, but they're less than 18 inches above the ground. With treated material, 2 foot is better. 18 is a minimum under the code in this state. In your state, this may be different. The other thing is, the higher your building is up like this on whatever foundation it has, there'll be less splash of dirt up onto the treated material. And the less dirt on it, the less likely you are to get termites, mold infestation, and rot. So here you can see some older treated material. This is approximately 15 years old that was used for ground contact for matting. And it was used intermittently. It wasn't left on the ground the whole time, but it would become waterlogged because we were using it as a creek crossing. And you can see in this environment, your treated material may only last a year or two because you're going to have vehicle abrasion and also sediment abrasion in addition to waterlogging. So how you use your treated material is really going to dictate the life of it. Now in our area, before treated lumber was available, back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, when people either couldn't get it or couldn't afford it, they used Eastern Red Cedar for fence post, foundations, and construction. It was so popular, they actually decimated the population of these trees in this area. This stuff is much more rot resistant than most treated lumber. But because of its scarcity, it should be used with caution and a lot of thought. In my area, I still see lots of stumps that are almost 100 years old because of the rot resistance of this material. So in our area, the Eastern Red Cedar is starting to make a comeback, and it's available in limited basis. And I've seen farm fences over 100 years old made of Eastern Red Cedar. So this is something to keep in mind as you go into a survival situation. Under the current economic situation we have, the hyperinflation and the collapse in supply lines, you may have to depend on local materials. Now, with most hardwoods and softwoods, if you're building bridges or things that are in contact with the ground, you may be in a situation where you have to rebuild these structures every 2 to 3 years, depending on the amount of rainfall and the termites in your area. So what you want to do is build as much as you can out of treated material in the next couple of years while you have access to it, both financially and with supply chain issues. Because once we get to the point we don't have factory lumber, it's going to be whatever you can make on hand. And you'll find that untreated lumber, with the exception of Eastern Red Cedar, is only going to last a couple years in application. So this will be a constant consumer of labor and energy and time. So the Eastern Red Cedar you should use as a basis for the lower parts of buildings and fence posts, and then untreated material on top of them when necessary. So the last thing I want to mention about treated material is fastener failure. The older treated material, you could use galvanized nails and fasteners with no issues. Some of the more modern treating materials in the last 10 years, you have to have epoxy coating on the fasteners, otherwise the salts in the treated material will corrode the fasteners. So as in this instance, you'll have fastener failure way before you have failure of the treated material. So that's something to keep in mind. So in addition to treated material, you may want to keep a lot of fasteners on hand in order to make repairs in the next 10 to 20 years when they're no longer available.